careful, please. That elite was an ultra.
Today we're going to be dipping into the Ultra Mormon Manifesto. This is an article that I read years ago. Basically, I thought a little too hard about what Ezra Taft Benson said and started to think a little too much about Official Declaration 2 and induced a bit of a political awakening in myself. Which, I don't know. I don't think there was ever a one moment so much as it was a journey that took my whole life. But I found pictures of 9/11 drawings that I did in like elementary school and stuff like that. I think I've always been pretty inquisitive, and I've always been very interested in 9/11, ever since it happened. I think it was just about the age that I could understand that something horrible was happening, but I didn't quite understand where or what had happened. It's been permanently ingrained in my mind as this curious thing. So anyway, that's enough about me. Let's read from the Ultra Mormon Manifesto. This is a almost book-length document that doesn't exist on the internet anymore. I've mentioned it before, but I was not able to find the source, but with the help of a friend and the Wayback machine, I was able to create a PDF of it. So I'm going to read just from the first few paragraphs. I think it starts out really strong. He does an extremely good explanation of, I guess, the problem. When it comes to explaining what to do about it, that sort of thing, I think he fails. The quality kind of falls off towards the end. But he does an excellent job of explaining the problem and explaining what an Ultra Mormon is. So let's just dive right into it, okay? Let's just jump right into it. Let's read the lore of the Ultra Mormon. So this is by Curtis Porrit. It was written in 1999, which is the year The Matrix came out. Very cool year. And I believe he's dead. May he rest in peace. But his writing lives on. So this article is called The Apostasy of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Some counsel to the reader. This manuscript discusses some very difficult issues. It is not intended for non-Mormons, nor is it intended for those whose faith is weak or who are not well versed in the doctrines, history, and or practices of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I feel it is important that a foundation of faith and knowledge exists before a person attempts a study such as this one. Without such a foundation, the discussion which follows may do more damage than good to a person as far as building faith and promoting righteousness are concerned. I encourage all who receive a copy of this manuscript to use wisdom before sharing it with others, always keeping in mind the welfare and best interests of those with whom you share it. And of course, this falls on empty ears with me, because I think that if Curtis's suggested strategy here worked, things would be different now. But it's been, 26 years or so, and I think it's about time we say that this suggested approach is no bueno. Everyone in the church has access to lame anti-Mormon arguments like the CES letter, so we might as well have a very cool opposing view that addresses a lot of similar points. I think that it's a great resource, and if it damages someone's faith, well, I don't think they were in it to win it. I don't think it's that big a deal. We live in the age of super short attention spans, so I don't think that anyone is going to bother reading this novel-sized manuscript that's been passed around for 20 years. No one's going to bother reading it. That's just my little rant about that. I think that's the wrong approach, because the truth isn't scary. It doesn't need to be so hard. Literally, you just have to accept it. It's not that hard, guys. He acts like he's discovered some horrible truth that is gonna blow up the world, and I think that is just the wrong approach. Get over yourself, okay? Faith is weak. Give me a break. Let's continue. Joseph Smith once said, "I have tried for a number of years to get the minds of the saints prepared to receive the things of God, but we frequently see some of them, after suffering all they have for the work of God, will fly to pieces like glass as soon as anything comes that is contrary to their traditions. They cannot stand the fire at all. How many will be able to abide a celestial law and go through and receive their exaltation, I am unable to say, as many are called, but few are chosen." So those are the words of Joseph Smith. I don't know exactly what he's referring to. Perhaps it's DNC 76. I know was quite unpopular because the idea that most people are receiving some level of celestial glory was pretty hard for some of these Mormons to accept, that, their enemies or bad people would be receiving some kingdom of glory, some level of glory. So that was pretty unpopular in the time, but it has since grown on us as being one of the coolest doctrines ever revealed. Let's see. Curtis continues here. He says, "It has been my experience that even among the most active and faithful Mormons, even among the most active and faithful disciples of Christ, we will find those who have great difficulty with some of the issues that follow. Please know that it is my intent to learn and to promote Zion, not to deceive or destroy. If there are false teachings found within these pages, which there probably are, I would encourage the reader to judge the teachings rather than the author. If there are offensive but true teachings found within this manuscript, I would encourage the reader to prayerfully judge themselves in relation to those teachings, rather than judging God, His gospel, or His servants. I feel this is important to keep in mind as we proceed. I will not be making any such requests. Please bully me as you please. I simply do not care." Introduction. There are at least 3 types of Mormons. I refer to these 3 types as anti-Mormons, social Mormons, and Ultra Mormons. Everyone is familiar with anti-Mormons. These are people who claim to know more about Mormonism than most others. They tend to pride themselves on knowing the deep, dark secrets of LDS history and doctrine. Yet for whatever reason, they have come to view it all from a rather negative perspective. Seldom do anti-Mormons say anything positive about the church or its doctrine. They tend to view the whole of it as negative, hypocritical, and false. They often believe that no good thing could ever come from any part of Mormonism. They have the uncanny ability to find something wrong with even the most innocent and positive remarks made by leaders of the church. Anti-Mormons generally claim that both social Mormons and Ultra Mormons are misled, naive, and uninformed. Yet for some reason, many anti-Mormons find it difficult to leave Mormonism alone. They often refuse to leave it quietly or let well enough alone. It is not enough for anti-Mormons to simply reject Mormonism and leave it behind. For some reason, they feel they must attack it. They often seem to feel somewhat duty-bound to correct others or justify their own views and conclusions regarding Mormonism. The social Mormons, on the other hand, are those who are basically the rank-and-file members of the church. They are, in some ways, the opposite of the anti-Mormons. These are the devout churchgoers who tend to doubt no portion of the restored gospel, whether they understand it or not. In word, social Mormons accept literally all the leaders of the church, both past and present, without question or debate. Yet in common study, conversation, and practice, social Mormons tend to appreciate the modern leaders of the church more than the early leaders, especially Brigham Young. Social Mormons are generally unable to successfully combat anti-Mormons. For the most part, social Mormons don't have the knowledge or even the interest to do so. They all but ignore the anti-Mormons and are usually content to remain active in the church without ever really gaining an understanding of the higher doctrines or difficult issues involved with Mormonism. Social Mormons usually have their testimonies of the restored gospel, but may not fully understand or appreciate the source or content of their testimonies. Often, social Mormons can accurately be described as having, quote, zeal without knowledge, or as accepting without question or understanding. Social Mormons may also include those who are simply inactive in the church, not because they know something, but more often because they don't. Ultra Mormons are a unique group of people whose numbers seem to have grown dramatically in recent years. Because of their diversity, they are a little more difficult to define. In general, Ultra Mormons are those who have spent a good deal of time thinking about the hard questions of Mormonism, but who continue to have a strong testimony of Joseph Smith and the restored gospel. They've dealt with most of the difficult issues and are generally aware of the arguments of the anti-Mormons, both historical and doctrinal. In fact, Ultra Mormons even view some of the anti-Mormon arguments as further evidence that the restored gospel is true. Much of what is considered to be a negative by both the anti-Mormons and the social Mormons, such as plural marriage, Adam God, or the United Order, is often sweet to the taste of an Ultra Mormon. Ultra Mormons also tend to have more appreciation for the early leaders of the church, especially Brigham Young, than they do for the modern leaders. Often frustrated by quote-unquote modern Mormonism, or, if we update it for our day, the modern Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, in general, Ultra Mormons are not always active members of the LDS Church. Some are even members of various LDS fundamentalist groups, while others have either been excommunicated for quote-unquote apostasy. This tends to happen less and less in our day, as I don't think that the average stake president could even recognize apostasy, let alone have the gumption to punish it. But anyway, while others have been excommunicated for apostasy or have drifted away from the church on their own accord. Yet, there are numerous active church-going Ultra Mormons, that's us, many of whom are unknown to the general population of the church. This is often by design because of fear that they will be kicked out if their views are ever discovered. Some of these active Ultra Mormons are viewed as troublemakers by the social Mormons because they continually bring up difficult issues or off-the-wall comments in Sunday school, Relief Society, and or priesthood meetings. But not anymore, because we don't have them. Due to their love for and knowledge of the restored gospel, they are often a little too adamant in their approach, aka autistic, in the colloquial meaning of the term, making people uncomfortable and causing themselves to look and sound like fanatics. These three general categories are not rigid in their definition. There are many shades of gray between them. However, most Latter-day Saints start out as social Mormons. As time passes, some of these social Mormons end up migrating into one of the other camps, a difficult and often painful transition indeed. Unfortunately, many of those on the path of becoming Ultra Mormons never finish the process and end up as anti-Mormons. This is often the result of having a bad experience with the LDS Church or its leadership. When one is on the path of becoming an Ultra Mormon, there are many questions to be answered. The LDS Church generally provides few good responses to these questions. In fact, often it provides incorrect answers or no answers at all. This leaves a bad taste in the mouth of the learning Ultra Mormon. In some cases, it causes them to stop the learning process altogether and leave the whole issue behind them. Other people tend to only focus on the negative parts of the restored church, without giving equal time to the positive issues so clearly present. Still others are able to overcome these difficulties and continue the process of objectively and honestly searching for answers to their difficult question. This last group generally becomes the Ultra Mormons. As a general rule of thumb, you can tell which type of Mormon you're dealing with by the comments they make about the church and the restoration of the gospel. In most cases, over 90% of the comments made by social Mormons will be positive as far as the church, its leadership, or the restoration in general is concerned. On the other hand, you can usually identify an anti-Mormon because over 90% of their comments on similar topics will be negative. Both socials and antis generally only find and speak about those things that they're looking for to defend their own perspectives on Mormonism. They sometimes have a tendency to put the whole truth aside in lieu of their personal agendas of either defending or attacking the church. Unfortunately, they are often more concerned with who's right than they are with what's right. Ultra Mormons, however, tend to see and speak about both the positive and the negative aspects of Mormonism. They may not always be 50-50 in their views and comments, but they will seldom be as extreme as either the socials or the antis. A true Ultra Mormon will usually be more interested in what is right or wrong than he is in who is right or wrong. Because of this, they tend to find and comment about both the positive and the negative within Mormonism. This manuscript was written mostly with the Ultra Mormon in mind. It is an effort to keep new or fledgling Ultra Mormons from becoming anti-Mormons. In general, most social Mormons won't be aware or even care about the issues raised in this work. It is possible, however, that a social Mormon may begin the journey of becoming an Ultra Mormon through reading this material. On the other hand, most anti-Mormons are too far gone to give these arguments any credence. My experience has been that most anti-Mormons have pretty much made up their minds and that a legion of sword-carrying angels could not convince them otherwise. I'm sure they see themselves quite differently, as is their right. In general, this paper will likely be unpopular among most groups associated with the restoration of the gospel through the prophet Joseph Smith. It will probably be unappealing to both apostle and apostate alike, however you define those terms. The arguments presented here reflect somewhat of a lose-lose scenario, and everyone hates to be on the losing team. Most social Mormons will find the contents of this work offensive due to the references regarding apostasy in the LDS Church. However, most anti-Mormons, and even many Ultra Mormons, will also find portions of it unappealing due to the defense given to the position of the mainstream LDS Church. In some cases, those who read this work will claim that it is half right and half wrong, depending on their current view of Mormonism. Yet I feel this is a work that is worth writing and should be seriously considered by all who claim to have an in-depth interest in Joseph Smith and the restoration of the gospel in the latter days. It is a work that searches for harsh honesty and difficult truths in the midst of hypocrisy, pride, and apostasy. It tries to point out the gray area on topics that most people want to see as either black or white. Although certainly not complete in its scope, I feel that those Ultra Mormons who honestly care about the work of God in the latter days will likely find this work appealing in some way or another, even if they disagree with some of the arguments presented. And so, that is the introduction of what I have called the Ultra Mormon Manifesto. And it gives you a good rundown of kind of what's going on. And for me, when I was reading this and I was starting to be suspicious about some of these official declarations and whether or not they're truly revelation or not, getting curious about ordinance changes and what exactly is the difference between baptism by immersion versus sprinkling, and, washings and anointings that are literal versus symbolic. And I was very familiar with the CES letter arguments and stuff at the time, but I didn't find them particularly convincing. But it was just a huge comfort to me to be able to read this paper and realize that, people have been feeling this way about the church for 20 years. And this is nothing new. And in fact, the more I've learned, I've realized that people have been feeling this way about the church probably since the turn of the century. Maybe even since earlier. But that's just the way it is. This is when the internet was first coming out and all that. So he does a really good job of explaining it. I'm just going to keep reading. I don't want to go on too long, as this is literally an entire book. But I just feel like the intro captures so much of what I'm trying to say. I feel like I've already said it, but it's nice to hear it from another person. So, the problem. It is clear that we live in a time of great religious confusion. There is a lot happening today that is difficult to explain. For some, Mormonism and all its associated factions or split-off groups has become similar to the times of Joseph Smith, when he was trying to find the true church among all the different denominations of his day. This problem is especially acute among the Ultra Mormons, who are actively looking for answers to their complex questions. The number of people crying "low here" and "low there" has reached epidemic proportions within the realms of Mormonism. To make things even more difficult, because of their LDS roots, many of these groups cling desperately to the principle of personal revelation. There is an increasing number of people who claim that personal revelation or some other spiritual experience has confirmed their convictions. These experiences, they testify, have pointed them in some spiritual direction or another regarding the restored gospel and the LDS Church. These various groups tend to employ the same arguments of conversion used by LDS missionaries since the church was established. They not only claim personal revelation themselves concerning their own beliefs, but they also claim that anyone can receive the same witness for themselves and thus know that the direction being taught to them is the correct one. This seems to throw an added wrench into the cry of "low here" and "low there" that was not so prevalent in Joseph Smith's day. As we've seen from the success of the LDS Church, this method of getting converts tends to work well among people who truly care about God and His gospel. In addition to the plea for personal revelation, this spiritual confusion is also increased because more and more people are learning the higher principles of the gospel as taught by the early leaders of the LDS Church. Access to church historical documents is at an all-time high. With a short search on the internet, or a quick spin of a CD, Mormons and non-Mormons alike can have literally thousands of LDS references at their fingertips regarding almost any topic. Unfortunately, what most people are finding is that there is a significant discrepancy between the early LDS Church and the modern LDS Church. For those who are true believers of Joseph Smith and who honestly want to live according to the fundamental principles he restored, this tends to cause some anxiety concerning those principles. To some extent, this is what causes social Mormons to become either anti-Mormons or Ultra Mormons. Many Latter-day Saints are becoming confused and frustrated by the apparent incongruities between quote-unquote early Mormonism and quote-unquote modern Mormonism. These incongruities have become so obvious and easy to research that it is no longer a viable option to ignore these issues or try to cover them up. For perhaps the first time in LDS history, church leadership is unable to control what people read and hear about LDS doctrine and history. Given some recent comments in General Conference and other forms of media, it seems clear that LDS church leadership is both aware of this problem and they are concerned about how to deal with it. Yet it seems equally as clear that no easy solutions are readily available. In general, the LDS Church seems to like the social Mormons, while disliking or not caring much about the anti-Mormons, and being confused by the Ultra Mormons, many of whom have no desire to fight against the Church in any way. Many Ultra Mormons simply love the restored gospel and have strong desires to pursue it in its fullness. For a while, the Ultra Mormons appeared to be largely disliked by church leaders, for in many instances, the church even confused them with anti-Mormons. They were often excommunicated as apostates and troublemakers. However, this attitude seems to be changing over the last several years. Although still concerned about the Ultra Mormons, the LDS Church seems to be taking a slightly different approach than it once did. The results seem to include more tolerance and fewer excommunications, as well as perhaps a different curriculum focusing on the teachings of early church leaders, though watered down somewhat. There seems to be fewer witch hunts than there used to be in the church. Yet even with these changes, it is still unclear how the church views Ultra Mormons. Excommunications still take place, and most local leaders, comprised mostly of social Mormons, still seem largely unprepared to deal with the issues raised by Ultra Mormons. And so, obviously, in 2025, there's been some further developments here. We have disavowed the term Mormon at all. We're not really talking about the church leaders other than the current one at all. We've published, the Saints volumes, which are kind of this half-half approach of rough stone rolling and the official church history. And they've also published kind of these gospel topics essays that are pretty unsatisfying, but at least they're acknowledging certain things. Anyway, as far as people getting excommunicated, I'm not aware of that really occurring lately. I've heard stories, I talked to this guy and he went through this whole transformation years ago, pre-internet, and did it all via, paper handwritten letters or something. And he actually got excommunicated for reading a Brigham Young talk at a study group, and someone at the study group didn't like it. They told the stake president, and he got axed for that, just for reading a Brigham Young talk, which seems crazy in 2025, but whatever. We don't even excommunicate anyone. I may have mentioned, there was a girl in one of my singles wards. She wear purple pants every Sunday and a rainbow pin, and she'd drink coffee in sacrament meeting, like a big cup of Starbucks in sacrament meeting every single week, and no one ever said anything. So clearly we are becoming a super tolerant people. I would be surprised if an Ultra Mormon got in trouble. But if you've been getting in trouble, maybe let me know. I don't know. I'd be interested to hear about it. In my experience, asking church leaders questions, it's not so much that they seem unprepared to deal with the questions, it's that they can't even comprehend what the question is. And maybe that's just because I'm bad at talking, but I think it's just because we've become very detached from a lot of this stuff. Let's continue. He says, By way of example, I believe the following portion of a letter adds substance and meaning to the problem at hand. This letter represents an example of how one family chose to deal with the apparent discrepancies between what we will call early Mormonism and modern Mormonism. This letter came to me anonymously from a friend on the internet. I feel it characterizes the concerns more and more people are having with the LDS Church today. The letter was originally written to a bishop and stake president in an effort to explain why this person and his family had chosen to become inactive. I feel it is a classic example of how many Ultra Mormons feel today, and it also expresses the complexity of the issue. So here's the letter. It says, "In 1977, we purchased the set of the Journal of Discourses, and that purchase changed the entire course of our lives. As you know, the journals consist mostly of conference reports and other addresses by the general authorities of the church. Members of the church are encouraged to be concerned only with the reports of current conferences because, since it is only necessary to, quote, follow the living prophet, no one needs to be concerned about the teachings of the former prophets. Most members who buy the 26 volumes of the journals leave them unread on the shelf. Well, we not only read them, but we studied them. And this has made all the difference. As we continued studying the journals, they led us to other sources of information about the teachings and practices of the church and its leaders in the 19th century. Over the months and years, it gradually dawned on us with an ever-increasing awareness that the church we belong to as mid-20th century Mormons was not the same church as that founded by the prophet Joseph Smith and perpetuated by Brigham Young. In spite of the constant reassurances by contemporary church leaders that only procedural matters of form and policy have changed, we began to realize that the changes have been much more extensive and profound. In fact, there have been drastic doctrinal changes, including total reversals of official church positions. How could this occur in a system based on the revelation of absolute, unchanging and unchangeable quote-unquote truths to prophets of God? Could one of the quote prophets have been wrong, or both, or maybe all of them? For years we attempted to work it all out so that it all made sense. The more we studied and prayed, the less the pieces of the puzzle seemed to fit. And the greater became our concern and our dismay. Eventually, however, we came to realize that the reason the pieces did not fit was because they were pieces to different puzzles. The church had changed so much from its 19th century origins that it was no longer the same. To list the changes of which I speak and to document them would lengthen this epistle into a volume of unwieldy size. Some of the more outstanding areas of concern, however, include the identity and nature of deity, also known as Adam God, Jehovah of the Old Testament and Christ, consecration, united order, and tithing, the nature of eternal progression, the temple endowment, eternal marriage, polygamous and monogamous, blacks in the priesthood garment, priesthood offices, particularly that of 70, blood atonement, preaching by the Spirit versus written speeches, method of missionary work, trusting our salvation to human leaders, world and national politics, government and friendship with the world, infallibility of the president of the church, the nature of revelation, gathering of Israel, rebaptism, adoption, laws of God and laws of man, establishment of the kingdom of God, sacrament, and more. In all of these areas, the present teachings of the church are not the same as they were before the great transition in Mormonism, which occurred just after the turn of the century. And he says, I received this letter from a friend in the fall of 1997. So now Curtis is going to continue his commentary. He says, regardless of our own personal views regarding each of the various doctrines mentioned above, the point to be made is that more and more people are beginning to see the differences between early Mormonism and modern Mormonism. An article in a recent Utah newspaper also outlined the problem. Salt Lake District Attorney Neil Gunnarsson talks about a caller who he said could point out 500 ways the LDS Church has been changed since Joseph Smith. An excommunicated Mormon, the caller said he can't follow the LDS Church, but he will always believe in Joseph Smith. Therefore, the caller tells Gunnarsson, he must believe in polygamy. Do you have more than one wife now? Gunnarsson asked the caller. No, but my wife and I are looking. That's an interesting approach. I would argue that without all the principles of the gospel without a community that is based on consecration. I think it's very unlikely that dipping into the whole polygamy aspect of the restoration will result in anything but heartache. Can't emphasize that enough, because there's a lot of these polygamist guys, and as far as I can tell, most of their families get ripped apart. And that's not because I don't believe in polygamy. I think that it has the potential to be celestial, awesome, all those things, but I just think that rushing into it is basically financial, spiritual, social suicide. So be careful. The crime of these particular Ultra Mormons, if one has been committed at all, is apparently that they love the restored gospel with all their heart and honestly want to know and do what is right. But they are having difficulty reconciling the, quote, truth of early Mormonism with the, quote, truth of modern Mormonism. This creates no small problem for church leaders who are trying to do what they feel is best and right. As this work will attempt to show, this problem is complex, with few black and white solutions. Another good example of the problem at hand can be found in a letter written by Elder Bruce R. McConkie to a member of the church. In that letter, Elder Bruce R. McConkie openly admitted that he objects to certain points of doctrine espoused by President Brigham Young regarding Adam. Elder McConkie stated, "Yes, President Young did teach that Adam was the father of our spirits, and all the related things that the cultists ascribed to him. This, however, is not true. He expressed views that are out of harmony with the gospel." And that's a letter to Eugene, England, February 19th, 1981. The reason this statement is so meaningful is that it is a clear admission that Brigham Young actually taught what he taught about Adam, and that Elder McConkie believed that these teachings were, quote, out of harmony with the gospel. If nothing else, I believe this is an honest assessment of the situation. It also raises some good questions about the popular LDS belief that a prophet of the church would not be allowed to lead the church astray or teach false doctrine. Evidently, Elder McConkie believed otherwise in the case of Brigham Young. Brigham Young's teachings regarding Adam are not only clear, but relatively consistent. To say that there is no discrepancy between Elder McConkie and President Young on this point is to state an untruth. Yet this is only one of many areas of disagreement between Elder McConkie and President Young. For such statements as these, it is easy to see how a person with a strong testimony of the Restoration can become a quote-unquote Mormon fundamentalist. Many people who are honest and serious about living the fullness of the restored gospel want to know what is true and correct concerning these doctrines. Yet when they study the teachings of Joseph Smith, Brigham Young, and others, they build a strong argument for following their teachings instead of people like Elder McConkie. So clear are the discrepancies between early and modern Mormonism that even non-Mormon scholars are starting to speak out relatively authoritatively on the subject. For example, Professor Harold Bloom, a non-Mormon scholar of religion from Yale University, has stated, "It has become somewhat of a commonplace to observe that modern Mormonism tends to reduce itself to another Protestant sect, another Christian heresy, while the religion of Joseph Smith, Brigham Young, Parley, and Orson Pratt, and other leading early Mormons, was a far more radical swerve away from the Protestant tradition." That was said in 1990. That was said 35 years ago by someone who is not a member of the church. Notice that this scholar is not necessarily attacking Mormonism or the LDS Church. He's simply stating that there is a difference between early Mormonism and modern Mormonism, a difference that seems so clear and obvious to him that he refers to it as, quote, commonplace. More and more people, Mormon and non-Mormon alike, are coming to the same conclusions as they study and learn about the teachings of the early leaders of the LDS Church. For those who truly love the gospel and have an unwavering testimony of Joseph Smith, this creates no small concern about the current status of the LDS Church. Regarding some issues, either they were right then, or they are right now, but not both. Trying to reconcile the various points of disagreement is difficult, to say the least. Elder B.H. Roberts once made a very applicable observation when he said, Suppose your youth receive their impressions of church history from pictures and stories, and build their faith upon these alleged miracles, and shall someday come face to face with the fact that their belief rests on falsehoods. What then will be the result? Will they not say that these things are myth, and our church has permitted them to be perpetuated? Might not the other fundamentals to the actual story of the church, the things in which it had its origin, might not they all be lies and nothing but lies? Some say that because one repudiates the false, he stands in danger of weakening, perhaps losing the truth. I have no fear of such results. I find my own heart strengthened in the truth by getting rid of the untruth, the spectacular, the bizarre, as soon as I learn that it is based upon worthless testimony. Elder Robert's insight seems to have proven prophetic. He seems to describe exactly what is happening today among many Latter-day Saints. Unfortunately, many of these people are doubting even the restoration itself because they cannot deal with this problem. Given the evidence, it is easy to see why confusion regarding the principles of the restored gospel is increasing. There is every reason to believe that this trend will continue. And from 2025, we can tell that he is very correct. I see no way to keep the flood of information of LDS doctrines and history from the masses. I also see no way to reconcile many of the apparent contradictions found within this information. And so that is the introduction to the idea of the Ultra Mormon and the problem that we face. If you are on the path to be an Ultra Mormon, be careful, because the tendency is that those who begin down this path ultimately end up in inactivity, because living the principles that Joseph Smith taught are basically impossibly difficult, especially alone. And your options are pretty much uproot your life and go live in a community of people who believe in Joseph Smith but aren't members of the church, technically, or to basically just sit quietly in an endless stream of Elders Quorum lessons about the latest conference talk about joy and love joy and joy love, which are very deep doctrines that will certainly keep you on the edge of your seat, and they will certainly keep you from having a real conversation with the people around you and developing any sort of relationship with your Elders Quorum. Anyway, those are some thoughts for you. This guy does a good job of explaining the contradictions and kind of the problem that is presented to us when it comes to actual solutions. He doesn't really have them. And I suppose I don't really have them either. But I would like there to be an Ultra Mormon revolution where we can convert many social Mormons into Ultra Mormons, and we can achieve critical mass. What comes out of this will certainly be chaotic, destructive, but I believe it will only be destructive to that which is bad, and that which is wrong. And we can destroy all falsehoods and accept all truths. We need not be afraid of damaging people's testimonies if we are defending the truth. If we have the truth, just don't be afraid. Be bold. We got to start talking about this because we're out of time. You know, in Curtis Porrit's day, the author of this paper, he could share this little manuscript in whispers, and they could boot up their CD-ROMs on their internet and go to www.worldwideweb.com and look up the Journal of Discourses. This is the world that he lived in. In our world, it's game over time, okay? In a few generations from now, the opportunity, in my opinion, will be gone of any sort of recovery. I don't doubt God's infinite mercy, that his plans cannot be frustrated, but I'm just saying that now is the best time, right? And it's not going to get easier in the future. It's only going to get harder. Luckily, God can do hard things, but we're not doing ourselves any favors by waiting. This information needs to be shared, and all principles of the gospel need to be protected and endorsed. Not just quietly in our hearts, but en masse, right? And that's what I would like to see. I think that this is how we can restore community in the church, even if it is only in part. We can build a network of people who really care, and I think that this is our best option. I don't really care about my individual opportunities to live polygamy or that sort of thing, and that's what a lot of these people tend to fall into, is that I personally need to live polygamy. I don't view it that way. I view the church as a people, and our efforts need to be not towards making it possible for ourselves to live polygamy or ourselves to do all these things, but like correcting our mistakes as a people. Because certainly we will be redeemed as a people, just as the people in the Book of Mormon in the Land Bountiful. It was as a people that they were visited by the resurrected Jesus Christ. And if Christ is going to be visiting us, it's going to be visiting us as a people. And so, as far as individual efforts to live polygamy and stuff, I mean, that's brave. I think it's super dangerous without all the necessary guardrails of the gospel in place, but to each his own, I suppose. Or not. I disavow that. To each his own, no more. We will put the common good of the Mormon people above the needs of any individual. That's the Ultra Mormon Manifesto. I hope that gives you a little bit more insight into what I am trying to achieve here. I want people to become the Ultra Mormon. And I think that all the anti-Mormon arguments are actually pretty good arguments for why the church is true. You just need to look at them right. And the way you need to look at them is with the eyes of the Ultra Mormon. So, I invite you all to become Ultra. Become as Ultra as you can. Don't be afraid to just cause a stir. Maybe make some trouble for yourself by speaking the truth unapologetically. It might cause some short-term friction in your elders' quorum, but in the long run, I don't think that you will regret saying what you believe. You know, it's kind of the opposite of dating. In dating, you never regret what you didn't say, whereas when it comes to speaking your mind in elders' quorum, you'll never regret for saying what you believe and for saying the truth. So that's all for today. I wish you well in your journey. Stay strong, and remember, it gets easier the more you learn about the gospel. You know, there's kind of this critical point where it feels like everything's not true or whatever. I never went through like a big period of apostasy or doubt or anything like that. I mean, I was definitely discouraged and felt alone and unsure, but I always believed. And always had a desire to believe, and always trusted those who came before me. It is difficult, but hang in there, keep trying, keep learning. We, better than any people right now, have the ability to make a difference. And that's because we're not dead, and we've already been born. So we're alive. Anyway, get out there, make a difference, do what you can, stay faithful,